Hello, I am Chandler Klebs, and this is episode 10 of Philosophy, Science, and Religion. And what you are about to hear is actually a pre-recorded Google Hangout that I had with Poffo Ortiz, where we talk about, different concepts of God, polytheism, pantheism, monotheism, as part of our response to what was talked about in episode 9 of Philosophy, Science, and Religion. In episode 9, we had talked about who gets to define the attributes of God. And so this is sort of a part 2 with just Poffo and I sharing what we didn't get to share in episode 9. I hope you enjoy it and learn something from it. Thank you for listening. Hello, I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with Poffo Ortiz. And what we're going to be talking about today is sort of a response to a recent episode. I think it was episode 9 of Philosophy, Science, and Religion, where the topic was about, who gets to define God, like what is the proper criteria for defining God, that sort of thing. And it was George's topic, and he was presenting this case as he usually does, that God is the universe according to certain attributes. But there was a lot of disagreement, and there was a lot of interruptions, in that people would try to respond, but then George wouldn't let them speak. And so what Poffo and I want to do here is we want to discuss how our reception was to that, just the two of us, and sort of do our own response to that. Because I think we were in agreement with some of what George was saying, but it's like we didn't get a chance to really speak. You know what I mean? You do experience that, Poffo. You knew what he was trying to get at, but he wouldn't let anyone else talk enough to explain it.
Well, I mean, you're being generous when you say, like, he wouldn't let us speak. Basically, he wouldn't let me speak. He went on and on and on with Trick, and they went back and forth, with their banter as they, normally do when it comes to the semantics and Trick being the uber logical, sort of rationalist that he is. That kind of conversation could just go on forever. But yeah, essentially, I was basically like shut down and snubbed, and I don't take it personally because I actually am very much in agreement with him to a certain extent, and I knew exactly where he was going with it because I've run through that same scenario using that same exact formula like 100 times in my groups. I've actually written articles about it, basically using logic to come to the conclusion, come to a rational understanding of how we can equate God with the universe. But George's God is not necessarily the pantheistic God. He straddles the line somewhere between a deist and a panpsychist, and he has sort of the pantheistic understanding that all of nature, constitutes this eminent creative force or power, that all things are really essentially like part of a living system. But at the same time, he also believes in some form of transcendence or some form of transcendent God, where there is a consciousness that supersedes everything and is outside of the physical universe, or maybe on some subatomic level, on some deep like intrinsic level, there is consciousness in all things, which is panpsychism basically. And there's truth to both of those notions, but I don't know if anybody has ever really let me articulate it and explain how we can both be right. I do take umbrage with his very domineering, tone, his approach of just basically manipulating the conversation to try and prove his points, to get you to a place where you agree with him so that he can then make the next point and the next point, where essentially it's very disingenuous because no one really agreed with him. Like, no one was following his logic. Like, Trick often accuses me of using non sequiturs, but George's entire argument was based on non sequiturs. Like nothing actually connected to anything else. It was just what was logical and it made sense in his mind. And then he was just trying to just kind of bogart and force everyone in to squeeze everyone into that view. And I know he wasn't doing it in a spirit of malevolence or any kind of there was, he has good intentions, but at the same time, I think, I went back and listened to it twice, and it's like astonishing to me, like how like humble and sort of like unassuming I was. Like I continuously said, okay, I see where you're going with it. I want to let you speak. I want to let you talk, but please just give me time to talk at the end. Okay, just give me time to talk at the end. Just let me get this out. Let me get it. And he just wouldn't do it. Like as soon as he perceived that I was saying something that disagreed with him, that went against his preconceived notion or whatever, even about who was right and who was wrong, he just talked over me and he started yelling and he basically shut me down. And you just don't, you don't conduct yourself like that, in civil discussion. And so I thought it was rude and really inconsiderate. So I think he just pretty much, sealed the deal for me. I don't care to engage with him anymore like that, because what's the point? There's no sense in it. Like I got better things to do with my time. I don't need to try and, force myself to be heard. It shouldn't be like that. Like it should be a democratic, exchange. And it wasn't. It was just completely, controlled and manipulated by him. And I don't think that's fair in any way. But, go ahead. You want to say something?
Yeah. What I wanted to say is, first of all, we weren't really in agreement necessarily. It seems like he just wants to make point after point, and then acts like people agree with him. But no, we really don't. We're just trying to hear him out. And I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, so you're saying this. But that doesn't mean I agree. It's just that's, I'm trying to follow where it's going, but I wasn't able to follow it. And then,
You weren't able to follow it. You weren't able to follow it, Chandler, because it wasn't logical. It was logical in his mind, but it wasn't really logical. And I basically called him out on it when I said, you're starting with the premise of what you believe, and then you're trying to fit reality into that model. And I take the exact opposite approach. Like I was an atheist, I was an agnostic, and I developed this deeper understanding of the world, of reality, of the universe, of nature. And I'm just literally observing and sort of recounting what I see. And that's completely different than starting with even a semi supernatural notion that which he holds, that there is this creative force, this creative power that is somehow conscious. I could go through right now and just dismantle everything he said. At the same time, I could go through and I could have helped him make his points better than he did. And I said this to him, and I said this to you guys. I was like, I know what he's trying to do. Like, if we could work together on this, because I've done this many, many times. But he wouldn't allow it because he's sort of insufferable when it comes to that. Like he has to be it's like sort of I don't want to say it's like like he wants all the attention, but we both have strong personalities, put it that way. And that's why he even said, well, okay, if you want to, this is kind of ridiculous too. I was literally responding to some of the stuff he said, but he's like, if you want to get into all that, you can do that on your own show. And I'm like, well, so I can't chime in. I can't express my views at all. It's just ridiculous. Like it's not here's George Ortega's show. It's the philosophy, science, and religion show, and it involves all of us.
Here's the thing. Yeah, because we've talked about this, Poffo. You and I have talked about this privately also before. That like you called it my show, and really it's not my show. Yeah, because no one person owns the philosophy, science, and religion, or the free will, science, religion, or in personal opinion, any of the podcasts that we've done, really. So understand that it's not my show, but it's also not George's show. So he shouldn't have all the say and be able to shut people up like that either. Well, so it's got to be balanced in some way.
We could spend a whole episode just talking about his fallacious arguments and the inconsistencies in it, and really just in terms of how he conducted himself, how inappropriate it was. But I really don't care to to harp on that and spend a lot of time
Right.
on that.
Yeah.
I'd
don't
like
want
to talk about the subject matter itself, and I could, maybe sort of reconcile some of this stuff, because I don't think I think that whole episode was just a disaster because of the sound quality at the end, because of
A few things I would like to say to anyone who happened to have listened to that is something was wrong. Whether it was an internet connection problem or some bug with the software, but the recording just stopped, and I don't know. So it's not very good quality of conversation or audio, but people who have listened to it know basically what was said, and it wasn't coherent enough. And I don't want to get into all the stuff that George said, I don't want it to be about George and what he said so much, but there was one key thing that concerned me that he said, and it was about, like, when you asked what his motivation was with it or something, and he said it was inconsequential. And I'm like, no, it's not, because why is something worth discussing unless we know why it's practical, why it matters, how it benefits our lives in that sort of sense?
What I was really trying to pinpoint was, what is his motivation at this particular time, and trying to express this stuff and trying to get us to comply, with his version of things. What is his motivation in that? And that's why he never answered me. And then later on, he kind of made this sort of tried to sort of ennoble it by saying, if we don't have a specific definition of God, of what God is, then how can we refute others' false definitions of God and all that? And so maybe on some level, I'm sure that's what probably motivated him to start thinking in this way.
Yeah.
Okay, but what I was asking point blank was, what's your motivation right now in trying to get us to understand this? That, and then I could have responded, I could have responded in kind and said, my motivation is so that you guys can have this understanding, so that we can actually unite and affect real change in the world. So we can have this shared philosophy that's biocentric and honors and respects life and views nature as divine. That way we will naturally treat living organisms and living systems with more respect and dignity. That's my motivation. So really, it's like you said, we don't have to go there.
Right. Yeah. But let's talk
about the subject. Let's talk about the the subject matter itself, because I have tons of stuff I could say about it. So.
Yeah. But I just wanted to point out that, the motivation is of prime importance to me. Like I've told you before, Poffo, the reason I listen to you is because I know that your motivation is good. I know that you think biopantheism will lead people to be more ethical and respect nature and not want to kill all the other animals. Like, I get that, and so that's why I listen, because if you can't in the unpacking of your philosophy, if you can't even respect the other life forms that you're engaged with, then why would would you even be worth listening to? That's my whole thing, is that even if I'm saying something that's dead wrong, that I'm completely inaccurate, you give the other person the respect and the courtesy to let them finish, and then you can sort of systematically and respectfully you refute their points, and you have a discussion about it. But you don't just talk and yell over somebody. I don't need that, man. Like, I've been around abusive, argumentative people my whole life, and like on this show, we're supposed to be above that. He's the one that has been touting the no free will thing for how long, and yet, like, it means absolutely nothing if you're not respecting your fellow human beings. Like, what good is it? The purpose of it, right, is to not hold yourself responsible, and not, for the bad things you do or the good things you do, and that creates a kind of equilibrium of balance, like a humble understanding of your own nature and of others. So where is all that understanding? Where's that sort of Zen Buddhist
comprehension of things. It's non-existent because he's a very emotional guy, and that comes out obviously in the shows. I'm very emotional. I'm very passionate, but
Yeah, I know what you're saying though,
it's all about time and place, and Anyway, so let's move on.
Yeah, but I just want to say, there's this ideal we strive for where we can all just civilly respect, that we're all products of nature and nurture, and we're educating each other and improving each other through conversation, but without it becoming a thing where we're hostile towards others because they disagree. And I feel like that a lot of that still happens on this emotional level, regardless of our best intentions and the logic that we shouldn't be behaving that way, if you know what I mean.
Sure. All right, so let's move on. Let's move forward. And there's so much that could be said. The reason I wanted to be on that show, that last episode, was because the actual subject is very important to me. It's one of the most crucial topics we could ever discuss. It's sort of the foundation of my whole theory of everything. Is really understanding what God is, really understanding the nature of existence. So let's do this. Let's do this real simple, okay? I just want to show you how simple this could have, it could have gone if George, let's say, if he took a different approach, okay? Nature is everywhere. It's literally everywhere. It's the only thing that's everywhere. That's omnipresent. Nature is just about the most pervasive, influential, destructive, and creative thing there is, okay? Like, pretty much you could say that, Mother Nature rules. There's nothing more powerful than nature. That's omnipotent, okay? There is nothing that is older, more extensive, more vast, more all-encompassing, and far-reaching than the universe. Okay, the universe itself. Essentially, we know that it had a point of beginning, 13.8 billion years ago, but yet, as George was trying to, explain, the potential for everything that exists was in the Big Bang, was in the singularity before the Big Bang. So that means essentially the universe is basically, immortal. Like, it's the oldest thing that we know of, that we can think of. It's eternal. So there I just gave you omnipresence, omnipotence, and immortality or immortal. These are the traditional attributes of God. So we can keep on going down the list. Aseity, if I'm saying it right, aseity is the term that I couldn't remember on the last episode, which means something that is self-created or it's self-sustaining. It literally, it doesn't need anything outside of itself. It's completely self-contained and spontaneous in its own existence, and that's another attribute that's typically attributed to the theistic God is aseity. It's self-created, self-sustaining. That's the very definition of nature. That's exactly what nature is. It is a perpetual, self-organizing, autonomic, like self-contained system that's filled with processes that we don't even understand, that are beyond us, and we're continuously learning, more and more about just the miraculous qualities of nature. So again, like, it just keeps going down the list, and then we get to, and this is the tricky one, omniscience. Okay, is nature really omniscient? On a certain level, on one, from one perspective, it contains all knowledge. So in that sense, it is all-knowing because all knowledge is contained within the universe. That could just seem like a play on words. So then moving on to the next thing, we really have to stop and consider, okay, how incredibly proficient and utilitarian and and let's just say smart, nature is. That the way our bodies are designed, the way the universe functions, the way everything correlates and fits and works. And you got to get really specific here. I mean, I'm talking about exactly the things George was talking about: DNA, RNA, the replication process, mitosis, the regeneration of life, the way that plants and animals spread their seed, and the way that they the way that their physical cells organize and collaborate together to produce these incredible designs. There is incredible intelligence in nature, far beyond our own limited, cognitive intelligence. Is it a conscious intelligence? Is it, does it have this kind of discretion and agency like a singular being? No, because it's not a singular being. There is no, singular consciousness that is in control of everything. There is just the nature of physical processes itself contain within it an incredible amount of encoded information, like that's just built right in to every living system, and all the laws of nature.
How I would say it, Poffo,
express this.
How I would say it, Poffo, is humans have a tendency. Okay, humans are very limited in their scope of thinking. They think that for a process to happen, that there has to be some human bossing around. Oh, well, you do this and you do that, and I'm going to make this be this way. And they picture it as one human designing everything. And that's the image that traditional theists have of God. But instead, what we see happening in biology, what we see happening in nature all over, there are all these tiny cells, all these different plants and animals, and all the weather patterns and the solar system. All these things are doing what they do. They're not taking orders from some sort of president or king. They're just doing what they know they ought to do somehow. It's very interesting, and so there's like a goal-driven sort of a thing where they have a goal. So I would say it's intentional, but it's nothing like the traditional theist concept of a God making it happen.
There's a real easy way to understand this, and what you're speaking of is the non-anthropic concept of God. Okay, this is really simple. This is a super easy way to understand this. Animals have intelligence, sure, right? And they can interact with us on a cognitive level, but they also have a programmed instinctual intelligence that actually is faster and more efficient in some ways to their survival, in that, like, literally the generations and generations and generations of cats — I always use my cat because I'm looking at him, he's laying there — that have passed on the genes, the favorable traits that are in my cat, allow him to have lightning fast reflexes and responses. Let's just say he does things without thinking, and it's his body that's thinking. His own body is thinking for him, and he will respond and react and retaliate, like the scar I got right there. He'll retaliate and he'll run, and he'll see things and he'll do things on a completely unintelligible level in terms of his cerebral functioning, in terms of his mental capacity, whereas it's literally just a amalgamation of his reflexes and what he's perceiving that cause him to respond and react in very efficient ways, in very smart ways. So the intelligence that's embedded in nature, it's like an instinctual intelligence. A brain is not required. A brain is one form of subjective awareness that we tend to hold up as the litmus test, and yet there are many forms of intelligence. So getting back to the point, I would say nature is just about omniscient as far as omniscience goes, because it is so proficient and it is so smart and is so intelligent in terms of how the living organisms and the systems, the natural systems, operate and interact with each other in a codependent, interconnected way that is far beyond what we're trying to learn to organize the way our cells already organize, the way microorganisms, do what they do. It's like we're playing catch up with our big brains. We're trying to catch up to what nature, in its own proficiency has excelled at for millions of years. So again, let's cross that out right there. Omniscience. Now, does that mean, and I actually just read this somewhere, does that mean that nature has nothing to learn? Because that's actually one of the definitions of the theistic God is God is all-knowing. It doesn't need to learn anything. It's perfect. God is perfect in his understanding. It's he, of course. In his understanding, he's perfect. Well, that is not actually true. Nature and the intelligence of nature is both an instinctual intelligence and an emergent intelligence. This emergent intelligence, in terms of moral reasoning and moral capacity and ethical concerns, that is actually just now developing. Nature is learning what good and evil is through higher sentient sapient organisms like us.
Yeah. See, that's just it. And this is important, Poffo. And this, I think people can get this because this is very simple. You can't know something prior to the experience that made you learn it. I think that should be obvious, right? So no, not just the nature of the universe, no concept of any God, of any world religion, could logically know something before it learned it. And the idea that something could have always existed while always knowing everything is just absurd on the face of it.
Sure, and there's some really deep ramifications of what you're saying right now, because in my ontology, in the pantheistic ontology, you just explained why there is a superseding consciousness prior to the Big Bang, because because it is in the process of learning and experiencing these things, but yet the programmed intelligence I was just speaking of the instinctual intelligence that's in trees, and I was about to say rocks, but in rocks too, in crystals and the way rocks organize, and in crystals and trees and bacteria and every going all the way up the in the taxonomy of the animal kingdom. There is that instinctual level, but there is also an emergent level of intelligence that's developing when it comes to morality. But so where did all this come from? That's the question. And this is what George kept trying to – one of the points he was trying to press so hard was, where does all this come from? There must be some form of antecedent intelligence. There must be some form of pre-existing awareness and intention behind the whole thing. And I say that there is this level of teleology where you can look at the trajectory of things, you can see how things are operating and functioning, and by observing that, I mean, you guys were talking about, I think it might have been after you signed off, the watchmaker scenario that, you come across, you're walking down the beach and you find a watch, you don't know what it is, you don't know, who made it, but you can look at it and tell that there was intelligence, put into it, that there was thought and there was this calculating, intention behind it. And so you conclude, this is the old sort of theistic or deistic, the deistic argument is that there must have been a creator. And of course, Richard Dawkins, he deconstructs this and he says, no, that's an illusion. That's the way it appears because of natural selection and the way things have unfolded. So the most efficient things survive. And so you have all this biodiversity and this incredible design. And I'm saying that it's both. I'm saying that the inclination toward complexity and self-awareness itself is the overall intention. I've been positing all along my position that let's use the religious terms for a second now. Let's say God doesn't know how any of this is going to turn out. That's the whole point. It doesn't know how things are going to transpire. It just knows what it is and what it wanted. And what it wanted was experience. It wanted to learn. It wanted to experience novelty. And so that's it. That's the overarching intention. Everything else is unfolding, and it is learning as every single organism, life form, ecosystem, environment, planet, star, galaxy, everything, as each thing is experiencing everything that it experiences, okay? God is learning what it means to be that thing, and essentially, in a weird way, enjoying the experience of existence itself, and that there is this collective knowledge of experience that is getting passed on and passed on and passed on and passed on. And then my theory is that we're all going to that life will converge and assimilate into one singular being, and that being will be the God that most theists believe in right now. So where else can we go with this?
Well, yeah, it's very important that because the omniscience thing, we kind of have to scrap the omniscience because obviously the other theists, they believe that this God literally knows every event, knows what everybody's going to eat for breakfast, 100 years from now, knows what color shirt they're going to wear, knows everything that's ever going to happen.
Things are not predetermined on that level. They're not. There is no divine providence, so that God is superseding everything, overseeing everything, and in control of everything, knowing the end from the beginning. It's the opposite. It doesn't know, and that's why it's experiencing everything it's experiencing. But what I'm saying, what I've always said, is that the potential for all this existed in whatever was before, whatever initiated the Big Bang, and no one knows this. There's no. Every theory you'll hear is just a theory, because that's where our scientific knowledge it ends right there. It's just a few milliseconds after the Big Bang. That's all we know. But we can postulate, and all I say is you can't have an effect that's greater than its cause. There must have been the same amount of energy and the same capacity for creativity existent before the Big Bang in order to create all of this. And so I don't postulate a conscious deity that exists right now. I'm saying that all of life is moving toward consciousness, because a kind of universal consciousness is what existed before. And then, in theory, the only thing that universal consciousness can't do is experience something new. So it had to, the great forgetting, so to speak. It's sort of the metaphor of the fall, go ahead.
Yeah. And see, I like the way I tend to think that consciousness on some level, not human conscious as we think of consciousness, where we have all these thoughts in our heads and we analyze the philosophical and scientific questions, not like that kind of consciousness. Because first of all, that's something that has only developed since humans needed to get into that stuff. But what I'm talking about, this instinctual intelligence, this awareness that all biological systems have, that type of awareness is what ended up eventually becoming the other type of consciousness that we think of in humans and other animals. Right. That's what I would say.
Right. It's an emergent property of the living systems. But you got to ask the question, why do the living systems operate in that way to begin with? Why is there this tendency toward organization and complexity and these pockets of energy that coalesce in space, in deep space, that then, due to the laws of nature and physics, end up eventually through a biogenesis or panspermia, whatever. Panspermia is what allows life and bacterium to be seeded throughout the galaxies. But what initiated the first self-replicating living cell? I say that the properties, the components were just all there, because this. Okay, so let me get poetic in here, like metaphorical, because this is the memory of the cohesive God. The cohesive God is a singular being. So since it's been scattered everywhere into trillions and trillions of different forms, its own latent memory is what's pulling it back together, and you could call that dark matter. And its own desire to be just a completely disembodied, consciousness, just pure energy, pure mind, is what's ripping it all apart, and that's dark energy. But let's get back to some other things. I wanted to address like a few more things that George was talking about in terms of consciousness, in terms of his illogical logical points that he was trying to make. Whereas like what the old theistic religions believed and stuff like that, and why they shifted to monotheism. And I mean his I don't know if he just hasn't studied the comparative religion or the history of the origins of Christianity and Judaism and how religions have influenced each other, and all the politics involved. But it's like he was just adamant about making just his point. And I didn't disagree with his point, but I feel like there's more to it. I feel like there are aspects that he's simply not recognizing. So let's get to this thing of, is God conscious? There is no way that there can be a conscious God that thinks and reasons and is calculating and processing things in this current time period. Otherwise, it is a horrible, evil monster because of all the pain and suffering that goes on in the world right now. So, like, if that's the deist God that he's positing, I don't really want to have anything to do with a God like that, because that God doesn't care about us. It just made us, and it's left us alone, and it's off somewhere else doing other things.
Yeah, I would say a few things about that, actually. Like some people might say it's entirely possible to postulate that sort of deist God, where this God that just started everything but doesn't care and is not actively involved. Somebody could totally make that claim, and it's an irrefutable and untestable claim, obviously. But if that's the case, sure, we're not going to deny there could be this there could be some kind of thing like that that's just distant, maybe, but it wouldn't matter to us as far as we're concerned. And so, sure,
because it's not benevolent. Because that was the last one of the last attributes that we never got to was omnibenevolence. The only thing that nature is not is omnibenevolent, because it is the one experiencing all the pain and suffering. It's the one that's actually down in the trenches feeling it. So it's not outside of everything controlling it in a sense that it could put a stop to it, or it could, it could prevent these horrible things that we see in our world from happening. It's actually the one that's doing the horrible things, and it's the one that's experiencing the horrible things. So the only thing that God is not is omnibenevolent at this time. But this is what I teach and promote, that human beings, as we unite, and all higher life forms and organisms on every other planet, every other galaxy, everywhere, we are moving towards this much more benevolent, tolerant, loving, understanding, sort of accepting, self-accepting nature, where we embrace the other, and instead of being fearful as animals are of each other, and they fight and there's competition, we're learning that cooperation is more beneficial. And, so we're moving in that direction of becoming a singular omnibenevolent organism. I would go so far as to say that even if we, the universe or God, what the omnia, whatever you call it, never becomes omnibenevolent, all benevolent, I think mostly benevolent would be very good. Sure. Let's just say more benevolent and more self-aware and conscious than nature is as a whole, or than the differentiated parts within her are, because the differentiated parts are awful to each other. Whether it's human societies or animals, we're absolutely merciless to each other. So let's just say that we're moving in that direction. And again, why do we let's step back for a second. Why do we even need to impose these idealistic concepts to begin with? Why don't we just observe what is the most powerful, what is the most influential thing, what is the most important thing, what is the greatest thing there is. Why don't we just observe what that is, and let's just call it what it is instead of trying to fit it into these categories? Because what you have, okay, you didn't get much into it in the last episode, but polytheism, essentially what the pagans did, is personified aspects of nature. They idealize certain characteristics and qualities and traits of human beings and human experience, and they projected it out into the cosmos and into the natural world. And then they deified elements. They deified elements, and they created gods and goddesses that had these very specific attributes, but not one of them was really perfect. And then when you shift to monotheism, it was like all the other gods became demons, and then all the good attributes went into one singular god. And this is the influence of Zoroastrianism with Ahura Mazda. So this god of all good, of justice, of light, of goodness, like basically embodied all the highest ideals of humanity. So that's where it evolved from. So we're asking the question, why are we idealizing like something that we don't even have any evidence or proof exists? So let's look at nature and just say, okay, nature is both kind and cruel. Yeah. It's both nurturing and helpful, and it's destructive and dangerous at times. So there's no need to try to fit it into this concept. And that's kind of what George was trying to do. He was trying to logically deduce or using this flawed logic to try and fit his deistic panpsychist notion of God into this box. Where it fulfills all of this criteria. And the only reason I bring up the omnis, the omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent, the only reason I bring it up is because I'm trying to shift the focus away from the supernatural and these false idealized notions of God and back to the natural world and say, look, there is something that's great. There is something that's immortal. There is something that's eternal, and it's everywhere, and it's all powerful, and it created us. That's the main thing, is that there is no disembodied transcendent God that created us. There's only nature. So let's just look at nature and observe it and understand it, and learn to coexist with it and appreciate it for what it is.
Yeah, and what I would have to say is, why would we idealize that which is obviously not ideal? And here's how I would say, okay, now we're talking about nature. We're talking about the omnia nature, the universe, whatever. It's clearly not ideal. It's got some problems, and therefore it should not have this omniscience, omnibenevolence, omnipotence assigned to it. Instead, we could say it's ever becoming more powerful, more knowing, more benevolent. We could say that because there's always a process. We in our individual lives and society as a whole learns more over time, learns greater and greater things. And
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's becoming. I wouldn't say we're going to help it become more all powerful. I would say we're going to help it become more coherent. We're going to help it become. Higher life forms are going to help nature become more cohesive and coherent and more ethical and more moral. It's already all powerful, and I don't think we can add to it. But go ahead.
Yeah. Well, here's a good example. When I think of power, now this may just be my personal experience that leads me to think. When I think of power, I think of like electricity, or I think of like the flow of water, like a waterfall. I think of something with great force, like a powerful wind. That's what I think of power. Something that can push something that can move something.
How about nuclear fusion? How about what the sun is doing, what all stars are doing right now?
Yeah, but when I think of it, I think of like, okay, electricity has always existed in one way or another. Even our brains are electric, and like everything is, all the cells send electric signals. But what humans have done is they haven't added more power to the universe. We haven't created electricity, and yet what humans have managed to do, those who have figured out, have been able to build machines that run that electricity through the cords and power these machines, and that's incredible. That's an incredible thing, but all we're doing is making use of the power that was already here. Right. So there's not becoming more powerful, but just making better use through increased knowledge of it.
let's say we're actually creating more neurological connections in the giant brain that is the universe. We're creating more coherence and more communication between the various differentiated aspects of this universe. That's what we're doing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's really awesome to think of, but yeah, we don't need to idealize nature. And I think when they try to idealize the monotheistic concept of God, that's where they went really wrong. Because back when you had a polytheistic system, which I don't agree to, of course, but it made sense.
Yeah, that made more sense, that you had a God of vengeance, you had a God of justice, right. You had a God of war, you had a God of sex, you had a God of forests and fields, you had a God of nature.
Because here's the deal. Back then, you could actually explain things in terms of polytheism. Now, they wouldn't necessarily be the correct explanations, but you could explain it nonetheless.
Well, let's take it back. Let's go back further. What polytheism is, what I tried to say on the other episode. Polytheism evolved from animism. Essentially, animism was the belief that all things had their own spirit, their own essence, that all things were alive on a certain level, and that everything had its own animating essence, its own animating spirit.
You like Pocahontas believe.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, you're like everything has a life, has a spirit, has a name,
And this is just a stone's throw away from pantheism. It's essentially just a precursor for a pantheistic understanding of the world. It's pantheism, sort of pantheism personified. Like not really understanding that the definition of eminence, that God is eminent, omnia is eminent, in that it's in all things because it is all things. And to the ancients, they couldn't possibly fathom that we are literally inside one gigantic, organic system. It's this really it's incomprehensible organic system.
Now, I'd like to ask, which order did things come in? Was it the animism, and then the polytheism, and then the pantheism, and then the monotheism, or which order did these things happen in?
The very first religion, essentially the very first religion was animism, and nature worship. And that makes sense, because nature is the most powerful, all-encompassing thing there is. And then as societies developed, as human beings evolved, we personalized, we personified and anthropomorphized, these qualities, these aspects of nature into segregated, separate entities. And then those entities, and again, I don't know why George disagrees with me when it comes to this, but he's clearly wrong. Like, you can research this and just look it up. For very important political reasons, the gods in certain places, in certain geographic locations, the gods were condensed into one. And this happened in Egypt. It happened in Zoroastrianism. It happened. You can actually see it transpiring as you read the Old Testament. Originally, the Yahweh, there was a trinity, and Yahweh's consort was Ashereth and the Shekinah. There was a trinity in almost every religion, because that's what people saw in life and everyday existence. You have a mother, a father, and a child, so they just projected that onto their supernatural beliefs, and their superstitions reflected that. But anyway, so it transitioned for political reasons, and a lot of it was whatever worked. They, if the crops weren't doing good, and there was diseases and sickness, and there was like famine and earthquake and whatever, then we must be doing something wrong. Well, let's try this god over here. Well, let's try the neighbor's god over here. Well, then these guys over here believe in just one god. Maybe that's the way to go. Oh, this is wrong. We have a female goddess. We have a female god, and that must be why we're being punished. So let's demonize the female god. And you can actually read about this. I believe I don't know if it's King Hezekiah that did this. He went through and he tore down all the Ashereth poles, and he outlawed goddess worship, basically, and it became a male-dominated. I mean, it was always male-dominated, but a male-dominated patriarchal society, a culture that saw God as this giant, authoritative king with testicles that, was just only cared about, subservience and obedience and, crushing the enemies and just basically, a monarch, a dictator.
Yeah, it's so clear. Like, it's so clear that the theistic concepts got based off of human society. Humans were a certain way, and then they projected that. I would say they were personifying or anthropomorphizing nature, and that's where you get the concept of a human-like being. And,
right. And I have many friends. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, and George tried to argue with me on that point before. He says, nowhere in the Bible does it say human-like being. And first of all, I wasn't just talking about what the Bible says, but we're talking about the behavior that these gods feel, all the anger and the jealousy and all these weird human emotions that humans experience. It's very clear that both polytheistic and monotheistic concepts of gods are human-like. They're modeled after humans because
it's
humans
right there. It's right there in Genesis. We're made in His image. I mean, really, He's made in our image, but it says we were made in His image because that's how they interpreted things. They looked around and they saw themselves as, the highest being, that the most dominating, influential, being with the greatest capacity to build and create things more than other animals that they saw. So they viewed the human species as being above nature and above the animals, and so of course it's complete egotism that basically
it's built right in
God
there.
must look just like us because we're so great, we're so amazing, so God must be just like us. But no, nature is something entirely different. God is a baby in some sense, and God is like a uber ultra intelligent genius that we can't even fathom in other ways. So that's the truth of the matter. Is it's both. Is it's a developing system that is operating based on its own proclivity, its own nature, and that's what we just have to understand. And so none of it is idealized.
Right. And here's the deal. Like, now, while I don't usually talk this way, but like from the pantheist perspective, we're all made in God's image because we're all the universe. We are literally God. So sure, we can say we're all made in God's image, but it's not a human-centered thing. It's not just humans, but all of us are.
No, literally every plant and animal and every living system and every manifestation of nature is an aspect, a reflection of God. And that's what is so difficult for people to understand, because they have to first demolish their preconceived notion of what God is. God is not this idealized figure. God really is everything. And this is not just semantics, Chandler. We're not just playing with words here, and it's not just some superfluous concept that we're just adding to it. Well, can't we just say the universe? Well, when you typically think of the universe, you think of it as this cold, sterile, dead place, this physical locale. You don't think of it as a self-organizing, autonomous, living, integrated system. You don't think of it in that way. So that's why we need to literally expand our definition of nature and throw out the old definition of God.
Yeah, and see, when I think of the universe, I'm not thinking of it as some cold, dead thing necessarily, because I understand the universe is everything, including all life. So we cannot say that there's the universe and then there's us, because we are the universe. So all life is in the universe, and I get that,
We're sort of the feelers, like the filaments, the fingers that are reaching out, that are becoming self-conscious and self-aware, and looking back at our own origin, and looking back at this incredible legacy that we have of evolution, of where we came from. And that's an incredibly inspiring, really profound, transformative thing to contemplate. And that's what pantheists offer, is an alternative to this, this very old, archaic, nonsensical, fallacious notion of God.
I think here's the deal, though, Poffo. It costs people something to come to this understanding. First of all, they have to give up their human specialness, this idea that they, as humans, are superior to everything else. This is an important step in coming over to a pantheistic type of a view. It's also important to be in order to be a vegan. In order to be a vegan, you have to understand that you are equal with those other animals. You are not more important than them, because as soon as you think you're more important than them, then you'll just use everyone else for your pleasure, regardless of how you hurt them. It's kind of like this concept of hierarchy and royalty. Like, you know how royalty is, like royal people, royal families are more important than other people, and it's just so stupid, you know. And yet the whole human race has bought into that idea that they are more important than all the other animals on the planet.
At this point in time, what's most important is life. It should be a biocentric philosophy, not an anthropocentric, not an egocentric mindset, but a biocentric attitude, because life is what's most important at this point. All life. And absolutely, like you said, is what we're trying to do in the vegan movement is elevate, the status of non-human animals to persons, to instill a respect and an admiration for for natural processes and for living systems and for these expressions of life that are really just other parts of us, like down on a fundamental level, on a molecular atomic level. Just study the DNA, study science, and you'll see that we're all family. We're all part of one organism, and it's difficult because there's a lot in this world that I can't stand, that I absolutely abhor, and but I recognize that even those negative aspects of me are part of, we're coming from the same source, and those are just aspects that have gone off, like having a dysfunction in your body, having cancer cells that growing out of control, that aren't aware that they're part of a greater system, and they're just very egocentric and living for themselves. This is what's happening. So I can both love and hate the serial killer and the rapist and the murderer. I can absolutely hate and despise what they do, and their actions, but I still can admire and respect the fact that they are a complex, a subtle and complex organism that has the potential and the capacity to go either way. And that goes back to environment, and the environment they're raised in and stuff. So that's why it's so important, like you said, about teaching, the free will myth, and also sort of restructuring our society to end the structural violence that creates all of this deviant behavior.
Yeah, and that's the thing, man. That's the whole hope of it. The reason I understand, Poffo, the only real reason we're discussing this is not just because, hey, it's kind of fun to talk about, and to a certain extent it is, but ultimately I'm hoping it will lead to this a less violent world with this respect for life and veganism. I'm hoping it leads to that. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any merit in discussing it.
Let me ask you a question. So let's say we conceded to George's model of the universe and his deistic panpsychist notion of God, and we agreed and said, okay, what does this mean? Let's analyze this for a second. This would mean that yes, God is everything, meaning the entire universe, everything that exists is God, and yet there is a part of that God that is also transcendent and is actually calling the shots and pulling the strings, and is actually self-aware, so it knows what's going on in the furthest corners of the planet, of the globe, and everywhere throughout all the galaxies, and it's allowing all these things to happen. Well, how do you justify that? That's not an omnibenevolent God. I mean, we're back to the Epicurean paradox, if God, I'm going to mess it up if I try to recite it, but I'm going to put that in the comment section below. I'm going to quote the Epicurean paradox. If God is good, then where does evil come from? If God is all powerful, then how can he be all
Yeah.
good? If he's all good,
I know the basic idea because I've read that before.
Yeah. So I want to follow the train of thought. So now you have an evil God that's at best neglectful, at worst a sadist, a complete maniacal sadist, a neglectful parent, and yet at the same time, on some rational level, that God is also the culmination of all things. Somehow that God also exists in all things because of the process of evolution, because of the teleological sort of understanding that things have a purpose and there's order and there's structure and things come together and and fit in a certain way, and there's design and sort of synchronicity. So that means that like this God that is aware of everything that's happening is also the one that's experiencing everything. Well, then what kind of mind would allow itself to be tortured and mutilated and ripped apart and allow other parts of itself to suffer? Well, this doesn't make any sense.
Yes,
because I'm trying to remember and refresh my memory. What else did he posit? What else is his understanding that there might be an afterlife because we wish it to be so? That there may be a continuation of consciousness because it's a nice idea to entertain? Well, no, either there is or there isn't. Either consciousness ceases at the moment of physical death or it does not. I can't fathom how a philosopher or anyone that is contemplating sort of these theological notions can be so sort of wishy-washy about it. And yeah, we could say, okay, I could say I'm agnostic about it. Well, up until now, there's really been no definitive, demonstrable evidence that there is such a thing as life after death. So I'm just going to say I don't know. But I'm not going to go around and tell people, yeah, that's a good idea, because that idea has caused enormous amounts of harm and suffering throughout history because people have believed in an afterlife and all the ramifications of where they might be going, whether it's to a place of eternal rewards or eternal punishment.
I agree, Poffo, because here's the deal. Yes, because what happens is along with the belief in an afterlife comes each religion to jump in there and say, if you don't join our religion, then you'll get this bad afterlife. So you have to convert to our religion. And then it becomes the religion wars all over again. So that's just it. It's not – now, first of all, I don't believe it's true, of course. I don't agree that there is an afterlife. But it's not even a good idea to entertain, like you said, because of the harm it can cause.
It takes the emphasis off of this life. It makes this life almost meaningless and petty. I think you guys have mentioned it. If there's an afterlife, if we're all going to be in paradise and exist in bliss forever, then let's just kill ourselves now so we can spare the suffering that we're
and I stand by that. I agree with that because if we all really did, as George said, he wanted to just have the belief that we all go to some bliss after we die, we're experiencing happiness forever. If that was the case,
that's magical thinking, man. It's just hopeful.
See, here's the deal. If that was absolutely the case, then there's no reason. I mean, then why does George try to scare people out of voting for Trump? He went on this big old thing for the longest time. He was so political and was trying to talk about how bad Trump was. But if people are sent to bliss after they die, after Trump kills them in wars, then we should all vote Trump.
Let's go down the list. What I'm trying to I'd like to address all of his his irrational, nonsensical points. I'd like to address them. I'd like to also highlight the places where I agree with him in terms of, let's say, the intention that's there, the consciousness that he believes exists on some transcendent level. I say actually exists pre-Big Bang and exists at the end of time when all of life combines to become this unified organism. So that consciousness does not exist and has never existed in the history of our universe, but I believe it is the core foundation of where all of this potentiality came from. So that's how that makes sense on a certain level, but it can't exist right now because we have the problem of evil. What else?
Yeah.
What else does he believe? What else did he say? I don't know. He strikes me as just a very passionate, intelligent man who really hasn't taken the time to think about these things, on a deeply contemplative level. It's just like it just sounds good and it makes sense, and then he just runs with it. But like I've dissected this stuff and gone around and around and around because I was a theist, and then I was agnostic and an atheist, and now I'm a pantheist. So I've seen all sides of it, and I've had to come to grips with what exists in reality. Like, despite what I long for, what I wish for, it doesn't matter what I would like to be true. I only care about what the evidence tells me is true. And what the evidence suggests is, it's an organic universe, not idealized in any sense. It's not there's no dualism. It's not this spiritual realm and then there's the physical material realm, and nothing is really separated. Like nothing in nature is separate from itself. It's literally all connected. And these sound like these catchphrases that we say in pantheism. All things are one. Everything is connected. Everything is divine. But you really have to understand what that means. I mean, when we say divine, we just mean it's the greatest, most influential, most impressive thing there is, the most important thing there is. When we say that everything's connected, it's because literally everything is connected. When we say that everything is one, it's because we are looking at the big picture. We have this cosmic perspective where we recognize that on a fundamental level, even though there is distinction and polarity within this unity, there is this monistic reality of all things originating at the source, at the Big Bang, at the moment of the Big Bang. So that's the understanding that we have. It's not just lip service. It's not just
right. Well, yeah. At first, upon first exposure, it sounds like a bunch of word games, like we're just throwing a bunch of words at each other, and that's all it sounds like. I understand now. There's a little bit more to it than that. I understand there's a little bit more to it than that, but unfortunately, you don't reach that understanding with George. You don't, because he just was like, I'm right, and this, and you try to say something. Oh no, sorry, but you're wrong. It's like so. It's just not. That's how I feel about it. Is even if George is right, it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. I'm
not really sure what he's right about in terms of his overall overarching ontology. I don't think he's right at all. I think there are elements to what he says that are, of course, true, because I think he's obviously further along than a theist or a fundamentalist. But he's making the same mistakes that they make, in basically personifying the universe and projecting human qualities and characteristics onto basically the God of the gaps. I mean, I'm accused of that as well. But
here's
God is the God of the gaps.
And here's another thing that happens, and I'm sure you understand this, Poffo, that when somebody grew up in one of these traditional religions, where there's a strong emphasis on converting other people to your religion, then people end up with this mindset that, I got to convert everyone. So first, like I told you before, I tried to convert people to Christianity, and of course I ended up turning into an atheist in the process. And then I thought, hey, I'll make everyone an atheist, and I gave that up too. But like, for example, that nothing would thrill me more than for everybody to turn so nonviolent that they were like me. Even the veganism and even the celibacy or the sterilization, whatever, just to reduce harm as much as possible. But I also understand that you don't get people to do that by winning an argument with them. You don't, not really.
Yeah, another good point is when I asked him the question of motivation, if he's literally just trying to get if you or anybody is just trying to get someone to agree with you and to just acknowledge your points and to just concede to your ideas, for the moment, I mean, there's got to be a greater, I don't know, a more altruistic purpose behind it. Like I communicate to learn, I communicate to teach. I actually enjoy, like you, the dialogue and the exchange. Sorry, I just had to shut the door. But at the same time, I mean, it should be a learning experience, and there is joy in sort of in finding, solidarity with others and arriving at a consensus and an agreement. But it actually has to happen. It can't happen in your mind, like on an imaginary level. You have to actually make coherent, cogent points. Otherwise, I mean, you just end up sounding like a very brazen, outspoken, headstrong, I don't know, dictator, and that's not cool. Like that's not what I want to do. I mean, he continually blasts me for not being able to make concise, succinct points. But it's like it might take more words, than I have the ability to express to get out what I'm trying to say. So it takes longer. But it's not that I just want to be heard. It's that I really want to communicate the idea. I only care about the ideas. This is actually a really important point. What ends up happening, especially with Trick, is you're no longer having a conversation about the ideas, and you're not actually like learning and growing and experiencing sort of this revelatory exchange. He gets hung up on every single word, like the dialectic, like it's so stupid, like it's so like futile, and what it fuels George's ego because he thinks that he's being understood, and at the same time it's just Trick literally not understanding and disagreeing, and it just goes nowhere. So that was literally like 85% of that last episode, and that's not progress. I mean, that's not, you're not actually, it's not even interesting to listen to, like my girlfriend, like she was listening to the show the other day. She was just like, it's just boring. Like these guys are just like a bunch of nerds, like going off and nobody cares. And so I want to talk about the shit that matters. I want to talk about how all of this relates to everyday life and how it's relevant and how it's, where it applies. Like what's the takeaway from all this? Like, I'm not just, espousing these sort of pseudo-intellectual, semi-scientific, philosophical, ideological concepts that just makes me feel smart. I'm trying to tell people this is what I have observed. This is what I've learned. And the understanding of this and the awareness of this is life-changing. It's transformative. It actually creates a deeper level of awareness of your own physiology.
There was one thing I meant to say earlier. Actually, there was this one part of that podcast you linked me to. That naturalistic paganism thing, and how he said something about it was more about a focus on practice rather than just belief. And I think, the practice and how you live has got to be more important than these abstract things about whether you believe. I
can quote from the Bible, faith without works is dead, in the book of James.
Yeah, there's that too. And yet, ironically, it's very ironic that Christians and Muslims have put such a focus on what you believe, as if that's the main area of importance.
No, well, that all comes back to sectarian control and religious authorities basically organizing people and consolidating power and material wealth. Really, that's what it comes down to is money and power, and that's why it ended up being so dogmatic and so much focus and emphasis on the written word instead of the experience. And so in many ways, yeah, getting back to sort of the concept of naturalistic religion in terms of like the ritual and the experience itself and how it actually changes you, what it does to you. It's I don't necessarily agree with Daniel Strain and what he says, but he says that it's not so important what you believe. It's that like when you personify and you sort of think in terms of these metaphors and these allegories, and even though they're not literal, you can literally pray to them, and then it does something to you. Like it allows you to be much more, I don't know, contemplative, or you're able to, in a cathartic way, kind of cast your cares up to these higher powers, even though they're non-existent. So I don't know. I have trouble with it because but there is something to be said for meditation and introspection and time spent in nature and time spent doing things that are inspirational, or things that move you, things that motivate you to a higher consciousness, to a greater respect and appreciation for the living systems that are all around you, and just the experience of this life, the human experience, and our lives are structured in such a way that we have little to no time spent in contemplation, and really like just getting in tune, getting back in touch with your own body and with the environments around you, and finding communion with the earth and the living systems around you is so important, because we're absolutely 100% dependent on these systems, and they are our origin, and they're our source. And when we die, we are subsumed and reabsorbed into them in this continuous cycle of life. So it's very important, because it's learning about reality, and most of our lives we're detached from that, and we're disconnected, and live in these crazy constructs of urban life, and with technology, with life as it is now, in a fast-paced society and culture. So
and now actually I probably should get going. I don't know how long we've been going, but I need to take more eye drops. But yeah, I mean, I think this has been a very good talk. And one final thing I'd like to point out, though, is, in a sense, like there's always this rush to accomplish as much as we can in our life, which I think is good, knowing we have one life and all that, to do what we can. But at the same time, because we know that all of the power that already exists in nature that made us what we are, everything we know, everything we've learned will be contained in other people. There won't be any one other person ever again like Chandler, Klebs, or Poffo, Ortiz. There will never be any one person exactly like us, but there will be, through variety of people, there will be other people who care about everything that we cared about. And that's good enough, really, who will carry on.
Yeah, well, there'll be similar manifestations of our character and personality. And also, if we write, if these podcasts, are popularized, if people, listen to us, and we're communicating, we're passing on our ideas and our awareness. So, like, we leave an impact, and that's, in that sense, I never feel like I say enough. I never feel like I have the right words. I never feel like there's enough time. But I mean, I just keep doing what I can. And I keep trying to just perfect this, the language behind all this, and communicate. And that's really what that last episode was about, was, the language that we use. But I mean, language and words are meaningless without the, without the physical reality that they reflect. So that was why at one point I was like, let's just talk about reality. Let's talk about what actually exists. And it's like he was trying to make a cognitive, sort of logical construct of what people have traditionally believed, and then show how what he believes is actually more logical, and yet it was flawed. I mean, there was a real disconnect there, and he wouldn't allow anyone else to to point it out, and except maybe Trick.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know why he.
And that's another thing, when we try to apply this omni this and omni that, these attributes that these other religions came up with, that monotheism created, that why would we borrow attributes of the human-like God of Christianity? Why would we use those attributes when we're talking about the universe, the omnia? Because we're talking about what exists, what is not ideal. It doesn't have to have those attributes.
So that's my question: is what was his intention behind that? Because instead of discussing the idea, instead of discussing the construct or the concept, like what does he actually believe, and why does he believe it? Like, I can tell you why I believe what I believe. I can tell you through scientific research, through observation, through using cognitive reasoning abilities, actually using logic and human rationale, why this stuff is true. Like, I don't understand, what the purpose is of just trying to convey an ideology that is disconnected from the natural world. And because he said it at one point, he was like, no, that's not it. That's not true. You do that on your show. And that's not what I'm talking about. And at one point I said, well, according to what you're trying to do right now, like your methodology, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in that God. So I'm not even I can't really answer this. And so we both kind of wrote each other off to a certain extent, because I was like, I don't understand the direction you're coming at it from, because none of that is what I believe, and none of that's what I observe. And he was saying, well, what you're saying doesn't sound anything like the construct I already have in my head, so I'm going to write you off because you're less important than my my motivation to try and prove myself right in this podcast. And I'm like, well, then there's no discussion. I mean, it's useless.
Yeah. And so, I'm really glad that we did this, Poffo, because, you didn't get a chance to say what you wanted to say, and it would have been valuable had you been able to say it back then. So we're correcting that by doing this recording instead, and it's nice. And at the time, I'll admit, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know where he was really going with it, because I couldn't respond to it, But so I think that's just how we have to do it. If it ever happens where, and with the shows I do with the other guys, or any time where a person doesn't get when they have something to say and they don't get to say it, then that means we'll have a future recording for them somehow, so they get to actually say it. That's what's great about it.
That's one way. Sure, that's one way you can do it, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak as well. Thank you. Another way, you could just regulate and step up and as moderators say, George, you need to shut up for a minute and let other people speak, let other people talk, because it's really rude. So, give people a chance to speak and stop being so, irrational. You're trying to make an argument based on logic and reason, and you're being the most irrational of all of us right now. So, it just reflects on him. I mean, I didn't take it personally. I mean, it was frustrating, but when I went back and listened to it, I was like, no, I actually made a good case, and I didn't care to be a part of that show anymore because it was irrelevant. It got to a point, you understand? It's not that I was like, oh, fuck those guys, I don't want to be a part of it. I was like, this is actually a waste of time. Like, I didn't even keep listening. I just signed off, and then it got messed up at the end with the audio anyway. And I think that was because of Yuri. On Yuri's end, he had a bad his connection.
Yeah, so something went wrong there, and so I'll admit it wasn't the best. But I would say a lot of our episodes do have better audio quality and do have better quality conversation than that one did.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, I don't want to keep you, so thanks for giving me the opportunity, and we can revisit this on my show. I mean, we can have a whole show dedicated just to that. Let's talk about nature. Let's talk about the real world. Let's talk about
we'll talk again real soon. So anyway, thanks to anyone who put up with us, listening to us talk about some of this deep stuff. I think it's really good, and and we wanted to talk. Poffo and I enjoy talking about this stuff. So, yeah, leave your comments below and let us know also more what you'd like to hear us talk about if you have questions about this stuff, this life-centered philosophy and biopantheism and all that. Anything you wanted to say, Poffo?
I don't know, man. Just let's keep it going, man. Let's make progress. I'm tired of getting stuck in these quagmires of over words and terminology and language. It's really just fruitless to me. Like I don't care so much about the words we use. I care about the understanding that we share. I care about whether you actually grok what I'm saying, and I'm going to use whatever words are necessary to help you, to help bring you to that understanding. So
yeah,
it was a great topic, but I think maybe it was just fundamentally flawed to begin with. What the title was, who gets to define, what God is? Well, why don't we just let God define what God is instead of saying that any human should define what God is? Let nature speak and tell you what it is and what it does and why it does what it does. And that's a much more healthy and salubrious path to take, I think. Let's just be children of nature and learn from where we came from and all that.
Yeah, that brings
instead of trying to define it in our own terms, because it's flawed human reasoning. I mean, a lot of this stuff is very counterintuitive. It's very difficult to grasp and comprehend, but
so yeah, and that brought up some thoughts, but I'll have to say that for the next time we talk, Poffo.
Sure, man.
For now, you and everybody else have a good night.
All right, brother. Thank you. Take care.